This is the third and final part of our series with Dr. Tim Stockwell, one of the world's leading alcohol experts. In 2023, Professor Stockwell published a study of 100 previously published studies on alcohol, including almost 5 million participants over 40 years. In the first and second part, Professor Stockwell talked about, is any amount of alcohol actually good for our health? He also talked about how big alcohol came after him and criticized his research, including even having his life threatened at one stage. This is the third and final part in which Professor Stockwell answers questions from some of our clients, our flagship Project 90 program. So listen in as he responds to those questions in this final part of the three-part series. All right, I promised our Project 90 clients that I would ask you their questions. So Marianne is one of our Project 90 clients, and she asks, Professor Stockwell, is being an alcoholic genetically passed on?
Marianne, thank you for that question. And it's a very profound and very important question. My understanding, this has been looked at in twin studies and genetic studies these days are quite advanced. And I think we can be fairly clear that there is a genetic contribution, but you couldn't actually become, somebody with a serious alcohol use disorder just through genetics. There has to be availability. Alcohol has to be produced, and you have to be introduced to it. There have to be encouragements. Some people react in a way to alcohol. It's just the way we're set up constitutionally. I think I'm one of those people. I think I'm at risk of becoming alcohol dependent because I get very quickly, it changes me and it feels very good. And, it's easy to repeat something. And I think almost anyone who has a drink, just one drink once a day, it's very hard to stop that each day. Anyway, the way we learn and the effects alcohol has on us are partly genetic. And there's evidence that if your identical twin becomes an alcoholic, you're much more likely to do so, even if, you're brought up in a different environment, you're separated from birth, or you were brought up together. So, sorry, simple, straight question. Yes, there is a genetic component.
Thank you, Professor Stockwell. Thank you, Marianne. Liz asks the question, is all alcohol addiction physical or can it be emotional?
Thanks for that question. I believe it's both. My take on it, and I think people who have had the experience of, I tend to use the word alcohol dependence. So it's like you drink more, you miss it more when you're not drinking, you have stronger cravings to drink. So the experience of alcohol withdrawal, people think it's just physical, but I think if you've had the experience yourself, it isn't. So the physical withdrawal signs are like increased heart rate, tremor, maybe body shaking. The subjective side of that is extreme fear and anxiety, and you really can't separate them. And so I think it's the body. The body isn't just divided into a physical and a mental part. I think they are, they are all unified. We are a whole system, complex system with physical, and we from the outside call it physical, and from the inside we call it mental, spiritual, emotional. I think they're one and the same, and you can't separate. So it's both physical and mental.
Sarah asks, when we know that alcohol is so bad for our physical and mental health, how is it still socially, legally, and politically accepted?
Wow, that's a huge question. My sense is that we don't quite, most of us, believe. I think the alcohol industry kind of owns our brains. I think, it's like a lot of people say they're not influenced by advertising, but otherwise, why would big companies spend billions of dollars on advertising if it didn't work? And somehow we humans in high income countries, particularly, have been hit with so much advertising and marketing around alcohol and examples, modeling. We've seen people we respect growing up drinking. It's so familiar to us. And so it's very distant, the idea, and most people aren't even aware that alcohol causes cancer. So it's our personal lived experience which influences our beliefs and behaviors more than something you might hear from me or is it written in one of my papers or my colleagues' papers. So it's a very profound learning we humans have undergone over centuries, millennia, and it's going to be a very difficult thing to shift.
Leslie asks, is it true that much of the research about alcohol regarding use and misuse has been funded by the alcohol industry?
No, there's some of that going on, and the industry would love to have a complete monopoly on it. But it wouldn't be possible. There's a growing skeptical literature. There's a strong literature about alcohol's harms. It's published in hundreds of different journals. I don't know, it's probably the proportion of all research on alcohol that's funded by the industry, it depends how you define it, I would guess is around about 5 or 10%. It may be higher. So there's a lot of independent research going on. But big alcohol is very good at marketing what research it has. It's very good at targeting the kinds of research that are done and representing the findings to policymakers. So they're way more able and powerful at getting their ideas and their agenda to be heard by politicians and decision makers than the 85% of researchers doing the other stuff. So they have strengths and weaknesses.
Alice asks, how much do alcohol industry lobbyists influence government policy or a lack of government policy?
Depends on the country. I think by and large, they are hugely influential. I lived in Australia. I'm an Australian still. I remember a general election being lost because a government decided to increase the tax on wine. And it wasn't just because of their act of doing it. It was the way industry groups promoted the idea that this was a bad idea and would have all sorts of negative consequences. They are very powerful at representing how, they employ a lot of people, that they talk about a positive contribution to the economy without reflecting on the fact that the costs of alcohol usually outweigh, there's usually an alcohol deficit. So the costs of alcohol usually far exceed even the economic benefits. So they're very powerful in almost all countries. Occasionally, some champion or some idea takes hold, which is stronger than their influence. But usually they've got a stranglehold on policy making.
Missy asks, what can we do at a grassroots level to raise awareness about the dangers of alcohol to the brain and body?
That's very difficult. And I think it's a great question. I think it's lobbying or advocacy you can do it in your personal life just by living and talking freely about what you're doing. I guess you could take local action where, if you want to see, there could be local municipal policies or bylaws that you could try and encourage to have enacted to limit alcohol advertising or require health warnings to be placed in public places. That in lots of states or countries, there are groups campaigning for better policies around alcohol. And so probably it's good to try and contact professional lobby groups already. I mean, there's grassroots work. You can probably, if you're creative, there's always strategies you can try. And I wouldn't want to limit what citizens can do. So, I mean, one idea, like citizen science is a growing thing where, like ornithologists get bird watchers volunteering to study the behavior and what species are currently around. In theory, it would be possible to have bad industry practices, have a profile put on those, whether people are being served to intoxication or there's really damaging marketing of alcohol that doesn't you could make complaints about alcohol adverts. So I think there's a number of areas where citizens can be engaged, and if they're determined enough. Um, so other people have more expertise on that, but I think it's a really important question.
Ben asks what I think is a very similar question, which is there anything you suggest we could do as individuals to help reduce societal consumption of alcohol?
Oh, there's Well, societal consumption, that's a huge deal. I mean, the societal consumption is trying to influence policy making and policy. And I think it's good to contact organizations who may be able to get, enlist your help in some way. At a smaller level, more grassroots level, I guess we can be aware of the events that we run and whether we provide non-alcoholic drinks and food, and that we try. Perhaps at our local schools or universities, we see sponsorship from alcohol companies coming in inappropriately, and you could be aware of that and try and oppose it. Um, you can write letters to newspapers raising these. You write letters to members of parliament, to your representatives. Um, and it's good to focus on policy changes which are achievable, not like let's raise the drinking age to 21 is probably one of the hardest ones, but like there's local things that could be done to restrict negative ads, or to promote health messages, appropriate health messages, which often exist. There's usually bodies trying to promote health messages about risks of alcohol. You could try and get their materials made more available. So I wouldn't want to limit creativity and determination. There's so many things that could be done by individuals.
Lauren asks, government efforts to prohibit alcohol, like prohibition in the US, have failed, backfired, or had unintended consequences. What do you think would work on the legislative level to help society?
Right. I think the reason prohibition failed, some people won't like what I'm about to say, is probably just because of I say just, because of the crime and corruption and scandal. The health effects, there's not many people realize this. During US prohibition, deaths from liver cirrhosis fell. But the cost we paid as a society with disrespect for the law, and it wasn't feasible for other reasons. Most alcohol policy and public health policy advocates now around alcohol are not going for prohibition. We're looking for regulations which reduce the affordability of alcohol. That's a really key one, like minimum unit pricing, or reduce its physical availability. So the hours and days that alcohol be sold and how many outlets per thousand people it's possible, how near to a school, what are appropriate places for alcohol to be sold. So I think modern alcohol policy is not prohibition. It's painted as prohibition often, like this is a prohibition philosophy, but in practice, it's just about sensible, achievable things that don't prohibit people from buying or consuming alcohol. They just make it slightly less convenient, slightly less affordable. And most people support that if they believe, and here's the deal, if people believe it actually reduces deaths and suffering, as most people aren't aware of the deaths and suffering, and they're even less likely to be aware that these policies are going to reduce that death and suffering. But when they are, people who do understand alcohol causes cancer are way more likely to support higher prices for alcohol or reduced availability. So it's a two-pronged approach: greater awareness of the effects from trusted sources, and policies that reduce affordability, availability, and acceptability of alcohol.
Just my own question regarding prohibition. What were some of the health benefits or societal benefits as a result of prohibition, even with all of the shocking consequences of crime and corruption and murder, etc.? What were all of the positive benefits of prohibition?
Um, well, there was reduced, um, you know, injury, trauma, uh, deaths. There's one example which is a little different. I was visiting Iceland and walking around Reykjavik with some people, and I walked past this lovely building, and it was pointed out to me, and they said, what do you think that building was? And I said, it just looks like um, an apartment block. They said, well, actually, it used to be our prison. Um, and they explained how they didn't need a prison. They had prohibition about just over a century ago. And during prohibition, they said they didn't need a prison. They actually didn't physically need to run a prison. I mean, we're talking about Reykjavik with a population, don't know what it would have been then, maybe 100,000 people. But, in some cultures and societies, it is, there's you talk to police in big cities all over the world, and they say that 70% of crime is alcohol related. And if people weren't getting drunk on Friday, Saturday nights, they would have much, much, much less to do. So less alcohol is usually less harm, and it's not just physical harm, it's a lot of crime and social harm as well.
Mm. Could you just list the benefits from prohibition, if you would, from what you've read and what you understand?
Ah, well, it's really, I mean, the benefits of not drinking. There's about 200 ways alcohol can kill you or make you unwell, and it affects almost every organ in your body. It also disrupts social relationships. It can disrupt social relationships. It can contribute to violence and carnage on the roads. So the benefits are really the absence of all of those things.
Maz asks, can you give my teenage daughter one good reason not to drink alcohol ever?
Probably not that your teenage daughter would take any notice of an old guy like me. So Um, I would try and find literature produced by other young people on this topic. Um, and sometimes celebrities can be influential over young people. My daughter has heard me talking about this stuff since she was knee high and whatever, and still my two daughters are still occasionally drunk too much. And the thing that impacted them was Canada's guidance on health. When that came out, it became a viral news story that drinking less was better for your health. There was no safe level. They suddenly said, oh, I didn't realize alcohol can cause cancer, breast cancer. And it was the only thing that I ever heard made them change. So maybe having them look at the material on the website about Canada's new guidance on alcohol and health, that might work.
Dolce asks, how will not drinking as a parent affect their children long term?
Well, there's evidence that young children copy it's obvious. We all know this. Young children are just babies. Children are designed to learn how to behave the same way as their carers. And if their parents or significant others, older others in their lives, are modeling drinking and drinking heavily, particularly, they're more likely to copy that and think it's acceptable. And that's very powerful learning. So I think not drinking, that role playing ways of managing socializing and managing living a good life without using a lot of alcohol or even any alcohol, I think can be really beneficial.
Final three questions comes from the same client. Dawn asks, which country do you think is leading the alcohol-free movement?
Well, there's been countries with an alcohol-free approach for a long time, and there's countries in the Muslim world, Islamic countries, that have had prohibitions on alcohol. And interesting, if you look at the World Health Organization's website, and there's a thing called the Global Status Report, there's good evidence that deaths and hospitalizations and problems from alcohol, perhaps not surprisingly, are very, very low in those countries. So you probably have to give credit to those countries. I would say people often ask, it's a very good question, but in reality, most countries have a mixture of terrible policies on alcohol and excellent ones. And it's very rare to find one that has all of the right policies at once. So I would say you could look at Scotland for their policy on minimum unit pricing. You could look at Ireland for minimum unit pricing, and they're going to add health warning labels in 2026. Both of these countries have fairly high rates of alcohol problems. And that's one of the paradoxes. It takes bad problems to get strong action. So there's a whole patchwork of different countries with different policies all over the world. If we took the best ones from each, I think you'd find wonderful examples from many, many countries all over the world, alongside all examples of terrible, negative, ineffective policies.
Dawn's second question is, which age demographic is leading the way?
In terms of drinking less?
Yes, in terms of being more alcohol aware, drinking less, choosing alcohol-free alternatives.
I'm sure there's people of all age groups that engage with that idea and are making changes in their lives. But the evidence is strongest over the last 15 years. It's an extraordinary thing. In about 30 high-income countries across the world, younger people have been drinking less. It's a generalization. There's some exceptions, but compared with middle-aged and older people, younger people have significantly reduced their drinking over the last 15 or so years in many, many countries. And it's likely something to do with the internet, and quite what the mechanism is the subject of big international conferences. But certainly young adults are there, and it's going to be an interesting world as they go through the life's trajectory and become the middle-aged and older cohorts. So they will become the policymakers. So let's watch this space and see what happens.
Final question, Dr. Stockwell. At what point do you think, as a society or a culture, we're going to reach a tipping point where most of society and culture now are aware of the damaging effects of alcohol, and we are starting or even accelerating our alcohol-free consumption?
I think the tipping point, you can't say what's a date or whatever. I think an action that's going to be a critical tipping point is doing what the government of Ireland has just agreed to put health warning labels on, the content of which is the responsibility only of the Minister for Health, and his ministry can change the health information and update it in like real time. So the US warning label has been stuck. Nobody reads it. It's black and white, poorly designed, hasn't changed in 40 years. I think as soon as more countries start informing consumers in a credible way of the harms, I think we know that people who are aware of those risks support stronger policies. So I think that's going to be the tipping point when countries start introducing health warnings. There is strong concerted effort from the within the World Trade Organization, the European Commission, and many powerful international bodies to stop, and they've been effective in some instances, stop countries informing consumers about alcohol health risks. And I think that's where we can get the tipping point, and that is a critical area of policy action. And I'm sure citizens can contribute to that, because in most countries there's live debate on the topic. Write to your MP, write to your minister, express your opinion on this. Consumers have a right to know what a product they purchase in many places does to their health.
Professor Stockwell, thank you so much for sharing so much of your expertise with us. It's been almost 90 minutes here that we've been chatting. I really appreciate it. You're a wealth of information, and I acknowledge you for the 50 years that you've put into this subject, and certainly more in the last 20 years or so. And this has been a real gift to my listeners. So thank you, sir.
Well, thanks for staying the course on this long conversation. Pleasure talking with you, and thanks for your interest.
Thank you so much for listening. For more content like this, you can check out our YouTube channel at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me and send me a direct message on Instagram and TikTok at James Swanwick. And you can see the results of our scientific study at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/study. If you'd like to apply to become a Stop Drinking client, you can visit alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. I wrote a book called The 30-Day No Alcohol Challenge, which you can find on Amazon. And you can always email me directly at james@alcoholfreelifestyle.com. If you're a regular listener of the show, would you please do me a big favor and give the show a rating and a review? It helps us get more listeners, and you'll be potentially helping someone else out there who's struggling with alcohol to find us, to listen to us and get support. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.